Somebody made a bunch of money on it, not me. So of course, if you're sitting around having beers, talking about cars, the conversation will typically go towards, oh man, I should have never sold this car. If I had held on to that car, it'd be worth X now. That's not why we buy cars, and certainly the rise in values recently has changed the landscape of car ownership and even changed the motivations, which in some people's eyes is almost ruined the fun of it, because people aren't buying cars anymore because they want them or to enjoy them. They're buying them as investments, which is a terrible idea. And I'm a car dealer, and I even say that. You buy a car because you love it. And there certainly have been a lot over the years that if I were in the long-term speculation game, I would have made just an absolute fortune by keeping them through 2015. But of course, who would have known? If we could have known, you know, hindsight's 2010. One of my favorites actually was a 98 Diablo SV, which I took in on trade. And that was one of my unicorns, and still is, although really I want a 99. And I really enjoyed my time with the car, other than the fact that it was constantly beeping at me because an ABS sensor was on the fritz. I sold that car for I think about 120 grand, and I think to buy that back now would be about double that, which makes me frustrated because I'd love to have a 99 SV for my personal long-term collection, and they're just becoming unattainable. I bought a Lamborghini Countach 25th anniversary off of a customer. And our local Italian tech was ranting and raving how these cars are going to go up, these are going to go up. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I mean, I believe you, but when? Because prior to that, I had bought a Lamborghini Jalpa. I didn't know anything about that car, which was my first mistake. It ended up being a really cool car, but I paid too much for it and had it for like 3 years and couldn't sell it. So I ended up just driving it and enjoying it. The joke became that it was the Lamborghini, help me sell this car, please. Couldn't sell it, finally sold it for like 35 grand, took it in the shorts on that one, and maybe 3 years later, they went up in value. Now they're, 90, 100 grand. I don't think I would have wanted to keep that car another 3 years to realize that gain, but I certainly wish I had, because it would have been better than losing 10 grand. So anyway, I bought this Countach anniversary from a customer, and I paid him around 130 grand. And I knew that I kind of paid him too much. And I said, well, I didn't pay you too much. I just bought it early. And I was kind of banking on them maybe going up in value a little bit. And thankfully, that was kind of on the front edge of the curve. And I sold it to a guy in Florida who was stockpiling them for speculation. And I thought I did great on it because I made like 10 grand. Within a year, one went through auction for like 450 grand. And of course the customer sends me that link. He goes, oh, I should have kept the car longer. I'm like, yeah, you and me both, thanks. I also took in on trade a really nice Ferrari 512 BBI 1984. It had 10,000 miles on it, 30 grand just spent in service. The thing was immaculate. It was so clean. I remember getting offered those cars by the dozens. I mean, everybody wanted me to buy their 512 BBI because I had sold that one for like 140 grand or something. I mean, it was all the money at the time. And so everybody else wanted me to buy theirs for 125. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This was the cleanest one I've ever seen. And then looking back, I'm going, man, if I had bought every single one of those, I mean, they went up to $300,000-$400,000 within a year or two. The countless number of air-cooled Porsches and long-nosed Porsches. I mean, Porsche 930s, nobody wanted. I had a few of those. They're great cars, a bargain at 45 grand, but very difficult to sell. And then those went way up in value too. And that was one nobody saw coming because, again, nobody really had any appreciation for those cars. See, I bought a 1970 911T. This was way back in, I think, 2011. I bought it for 18 grand. And it was a nice car, California car. Again, it was a T. It was an early T, so it was the low horsepower model, and it was just undesirable. I finally sold it for like 22 grand to somebody overseas, And it was a whole nightmare because right before I sold it, there ended up being like a fuel leak, so I had to get it over to the local Porsche service shop. The guy who was handling it for me lost the key, so then he had to get a new lock cylinder made, and like the shipper was coming the next day. And it was just a huge headache to make a little bit of money. Within a matter of a few years, that was a 6-figure car. Who would have known? I couldn't give that thing away for 25 grand. I think one of the funniest ones I'm still a little bit sore about, but a customer consigned to me 2 of his Porsches, a white 993 Turbo and a white 964 Speedster. The forum commentators can be quite vicious sometimes, especially when a car is priced above what they feel is the market price. So this white 993 Turbo had previously been advertised for like 57 grand. So after I consigned it, we had it priced at 65 grand for a 993 Turbo. And the comments on my for sale post on Rent were nothing short of just vitriol. And I remember one of the comments was something to the effect of 65 grand? What'd you do? Like pack the glove box with cocaine to make it worth that much? It's just funny looking back on those because there's so many of those posts where people had cars priced slightly over market. And you look back now and go, who's laughing now? Because the car is worth $120,000, $150,000 all day long. But the consignor ended up screwing me over because he signed an agreement to sell a car for a certain amount, and I had his Speedster sold, and he ended up selling it to somebody else for like $3,000 more. So he screwed me over for a few grand, and then he kind of missed out on the whole run up as well. So we both kind of got screwed. One of my favorites that I missed, and I don't regret missing this for the money. I actually wish I had that car today. A customer of mine had a early 70s 911 in Mexico blue. It was probably partially responsible for me becoming the Mexican Stig. It had a hot motor. It was a 3.2 liter twin plug motor. The thing ran like a raped ape above 3,000 RPM, but it would barely idle below that, which was perfect. That's what you want in a Porsche. The body was so-so, but there was no rust. And I sold it for $15,000. But nobody cared about those cars. And that's a car I really wish I had today, like regardless of value, because that would have made a great daily driver hot rod Porsche. So another one I sold was a 1980 BMW M1. And it was not a Pro car, but it had the Pro car body kit, and it was painted pearl white, which at the time was the kiss of death for that car because it wasn't original. Original ones could easily be had for low $100,000. So I tried for quite a while. It took me a while to sell this car. I finally sold it to a collector out in California around 2012 for I think 126 grand. We knew at the time this is a car we should keep for a while longer because it's going to go up in value. But as a dealer, I've got to keep my cash moving. You know, I don't have millions of dollars to just squat on cars hoping they'll go up in value. And sure enough, $500,000 car. I went to Barrett-Jackson in 2009, I think in Vegas. It was their first sale in Vegas. And their featured car was a Jaguar XJ220. And I didn't even register for Bidder's Pass. I'm like, this would be cool to bid on it, but it'll go for crazy money. I've always wanted one because it was the best car to drive and Need for Speed growing up. And it ended up selling for $130,000. Granted, that was right after the financial crisis, but it was still an XJ220 for $130,000. To add insult to injury, it ended up going to a guy in Cleveland. And then he wanted to sell it a couple years later for, I think, $200,000. And I offered him $180,000. And it had been fully serviced and the fuel cells replaced and all that. We were 20 grand apart, never closed the gap. I had 2 shots at that car. And then that car became a $500,000 car. Kind of an interesting one was when the 918 was first released. I had a lot of discussions with my customers about the value. And the general consensus was, there's no way we're paying $1 million for this hybrid thingamajig when you can buy a Carrera GT for $350,000. Even though I was on Porsche's blacklist for my shenanigans with the GT3 RS and flipping those, I had dealers begging me to place a 918 order. And I got the VIP literature, and I didn't place a deposit because I didn't think it was worth it. And hindsight's 2010. If I had known, I would have been able to buy a 918, keep it for a while, make 50%, and get a bunch of GT cars after that. The 599 6-speed was one of the kind of most entertaining ones because I had sold a number of the 599 manuals prior to their drastic run up in value. And the funny thing was that nobody really wanted them because the transmission in those cars is horrendously unreliable. Every single car I've looked at service records for has had the transmission replaced. A customer of mine came to me, and there was a very low mileage one for sale in Hawaii. And he had really wanted one, but had been hesitant due to the transmission issues. And the guy wanted 200 something. And he goes, nah, it's too much. You know, I've seen them for sale for less. I'm like, Fred, buy the car. Pay whatever he wants, just buy the car. Because I had seen the RM listing for this 599 6-speed, and they had put the estimate at, I think, 225 to 250, which I thought was optimistic, but I said, they're valuing it here. That's far more than they've been selling for. Just buy the car. And he hemmed and hawed, ended up not going through with the deal. Not a couple weeks later, they raised the paddle for 200 and it was 300, 400. We're just like sitting there going, what the heck is happening? And it sold for $680,000. And of course, you know, he probably had 20 of them in his warehouse and was driving the market up. But regardless, the market got driven up. And of course, my customer Fred called me. He goes, you were right. I'm like, I wasn't that right. If I was that right, I would have bought 10 of them. But again, that's not the norm. We don't buy cars to make money in the long run. We buy them to enjoy them. It's certainly fun, I guess, to recount our tales of woe, but it's a lot more fun to look back and say, hey, I really enjoyed this car. I bought it. I drove it. If you can enjoy it and not lose your shirt on it, it's a good day.